1978, he and his family moved down to Pietermaritzburg, where he became the chief professional officer at the town passport. He stayed in Pietermaritzburg for roughly 5 years. He started his woodworking in Pietermaritzburg, and then he got a position with Anglo-American. And Butch never looked back from this. He came up to Johannesburg, and I think he had the best job in the world, because all he went to, from farm to farm, and he chopped down tree after tree. But it's not true, really, Butch. Now he had a very senior position with Anglo-American, looking after their properties and that. He retired a couple of years ago, and he's devoted himself full-time now to his hobby. Butch, I can't do you justice. You come and do it.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please tell me if you can't hear me properly. It's an honor to be with you this evening, and thanks to Bill and Dennis for organizing everything so efficiently. It's a pleasure to work or do something for a well-organized association. Now, what I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give you a short talk, and then I'll run through about 80 kind of slides. The talk that I'm going to do is really about, well, the title of the talk, I think you may have seen, is called A Future in Lathe Art. And my idea really is not to tell people how to go about their lathe work, but really to provide some inspiration, possibly for people in the audience that are interested in turning, but also to provide inspiration for anybody that's interested in woodwork, because the principles are basically the same. We're all here because we enjoy working with timber, I assume. I know there are not many turners. How many turners are there in the audience? Okay, well, maybe we can help to change that, Abel. But yeah, I'm going to talk to you about that issue, and then I'll take you through a process that I've gone through in my life, where I started off, and hopefully to provide some ideas and some direction. If you want to take your wood hobby, be it wood turning or carpentry or whatever you're doing, if you want to take it a bit further, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but I have to address you as someone that is doing something, but you're hoping to do something slightly better. You're hoping to aim for a slightly higher market. You're not mass producing stuff. There's nothing wrong with mass producing stuff. But I'm saying that I'm going to be talking to you about taking your hobby further, personalizing whatever you're making, so that when people look at a table, or if they look at a bowl, or they look at something, they can see who made it. It's now verging on something that's artistic. And artistic pieces, it applies to any form of art today. If you're an artist and people look at your paint and look at a painting, they must be able to see who made that painting without looking at the name. Okay? So your work has become distinctive. Now your work starts to acquire value beyond just the material piece that the guy sees. Your name is now starting to add value to that. And that's obviously a slightly different way of doing things, but possibly there are some people in the audience that have an artistic flair. So I can just tell you, how I went about doing things, and I don't profess to be a great artist, but I've certainly managed to enter the upper end of the wood turning market, in South Africa and in Europe and America. Okay, so what I'd like to do is talk to you I'm not sure how much time I've got before people will start creeping out of the door, but I'll try and keep the talk to about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll look at the slides, and the slides we can run through quite quickly. The slides really show you a bit about my background, where I come from, and where I gain my inspiration for my work, and then just showing you some of the work that I do, some of the completed projects, and then just very briefly some of the techniques that I use to make large pieces and then the smaller inlaid pieces. I'd like to start off by saying that each one of us are individuals. We are the products of our environment. We went to school, we stayed at home, we learned things from our parents, we learned things at school, university, or wherever else. And those have affected our lives in a certain way. We're also a product of our genetic makeup. And those two things together make us what we are. And they give us certain capabilities. Each person in this audience has different capabilities, strengths and weaknesses. And what I'm suggesting is that if you want to get ahead with your woodwork or your wood turning, then you need to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. You need to take stock, as it were, of the skills that you have inherited and that you have acquired over your lifetime. You have to know what those are, and then you have to say, right, this is what I am, and then this is what I know I can do better at. And then you have to start working in that sort of a direction. When I started my wood turning in 1998, that's about 8 years ago, I started quite by accident. I'd always loved working with wood. I assume many of you do too. I'd done a bit of carpentry, I made a bit of furniture at home. I loved working with hardwoods, I loved working with heavy timbers like sleeper wood. And when I started wood turning and I started making bowls, I knew that I wanted to make more of them, and I knew I wanted to make big bowls. That's what I enjoyed doing. I enjoyed the challenge, the physical and the mental challenge of doing big pieces. And so that's what I concentrated on. I made more and more big bowls. My first lathe lasted 6 months, my record lathe, and then it started walking out of the door of my workshop because of the vibration. Then I bought a Nova lathe, and that took me for about another 8 months. And then I imported a big wood turning lathe from the UK, a VB36, which is bolted to the floor. It's a cast iron lathe, and that's where I am now. That's adequate for whatever I want to do. But over time, I honed my skills. I did a course in South Africa when I started turning, because I'd never seen a lathe before until about 8 years ago. I started subscribing to wood turning magazines. I bought books, I bought art books, and then I went overseas and I did a turning course there. And then I just basically came back home. I joined the Johannesburg wood turners, and I just started practicing. And what I'm really suggesting by what I'm saying now is that anybody that wants to get anywhere in their wood working hobby or job, if you want to turn studio furniture once off, or if you want to make once off studio furniture, you want to enter the upper end of the market, then you have to put quite a lot more into each project than you may be accustomed to. You have to spend a lot more time planning and executing the job, and then you have to personalize it. If you go to America and you look at some of the art dealers there, you'll find custom-made furniture by really well-known artists, and these pieces go for $10, $20, $30, $40,000. Dollars, not rands. These are the top end of the market. If there's anybody that's aspiring to go into that market, it's obviously not quite as easy in South Africa, because we don't have the buying power. But I can tell you, work that is technically well executed work that is personalized, work that is made with good timber. There are people in South Africa that will buy it. You've just got to find them. We can talk a bit about that later on. But let's assume that whatever wood hobby we're into, that we have the time and the resources and the interest to pursue this hobby. What do we do? What do we do to get ahead of the pack, as it were? Well, I can tell you there's absolutely no doubt, and there's no replacement for a lot of hard work. There's no ways that you can get ahead with personalized art objects if you aren't prepared to put in a lot of hard work. You also have to do a lot of studying, of not only of the market, but of what's on the market, what is available on the market. How can you bring your work to the market and add something that somebody else is not adding? How can you compete with a market in Europe and in North America? You have to visit those markets. You have to see what the opposition, as it were, what they are doing, what are they producing. Can you bring something to that market that's new and different? If you can't, then you're going to battle to get into that market. It's almost impossible to get into these markets if you can't bring something new to the market. People are always looking for something new and exciting. Believe me, they are always looking for something new and exciting. Now, as far as wood turning is concerned, there's a lot of ways of making money. You can be a production turner. You can turn table legs. You can make lots of little bowls. You can do all kinds of things, and you can earn money from it, or you can use it as gifts, whatever you please, whatever pleases you. And there are more resources available to wood turners than there are to woodworkers. And I mean resources, I mean affordable resources. There are tree felling companies in South Africa and in Johannesburg that are dumping thousands of tons of timber almost on a daily basis. And a lot of that timber is good. There are very few people that are sawing that timber. It's really just going to waste. It's a great pity. I think the day will come when people will realize that they can't get hardwoods as easily as they used to, and they're going to have to use some of the local timbers. And there's some local timbers, exotics and indigenous, that are wonderful for carpentry and for wood turning. And we all started off using those products. I'm a little bit lucky because I have contacts out in the field from my interest in wildlife. I know places and I know people and I know farmers, and they let me know when they're clearing lands and they're cutting down leadwood trees and tambotis and all this kind of thing. So I have access to wood, which probably many other people don't have. But I can tell you there is a lot of wood out there. So you don't have to pay a lot of money for your turning stock, as it were. As far as selling your goods are concerned, we can talk all night about that. But basically, if you happen to live in Cape Town or Durban or one of the cities where there are tourist outlets and you're making nice turned items, you can sell it into the tourist trade more easily than you can into the South African market. South Africans are still a little bit naive about wood turning. They see a bowl and they say, oh, I can make one of those myself. Well, maybe sometimes they can. But the European and American markets are better educated in many of these things, and we all have to make a contribution to try and get people to understand our trade better. Because when people understand things and they know the technical expertise that's required, maybe the artistry, the value of the wood, then they develop a holistic idea of the value of the piece, and they're prepared to pay money for it. And let me tell you, if you're doing good work and you're talking to educated people, you can get good money for work in South Africa. You can get good money for it. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about it. But I can also tell you that it's quite often it's much easier to make something than to sell it. Okay, you may have experienced that yourself. So, you know, we all need to go out into the market with whatever we're making, and we need to, you know, make it available. We have to try different outlets. Put your stuff in a furniture shop. I've sold some of my bowls in furniture shops in Johannesburg. I sell most of my stuff to people that come to my home now. I sell my work to corporates. They want big pieces for a corporate environment or for a big dining room table. They want a big bowl. That's what I do. And that's how I earn my living and make my money at the moment. My advice to those people that are keen to sell high quality products into the market is that I've found that everything that you do, you must regard as something really special. You must plan that project properly, and you must execute it to the best of your ability. Now you've made something that, for starters, you are proud of, and you can place a value on it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this piece that you've made. You can now feel confident of putting a realistic price on it. A price that doesn't only take the timber into account, like the 4,000 Rand for the table, but that takes the 50 or 80 or 100 hours or more that you spent on it into account. And then you obviously have to decide, well, my time is worth 100 to 300 Rand an hour, and then you've got to multiply it out, and that's what the guy should start paying for these good pieces. We mustn't sell good work for low prices. We're undercutting the market, and we're destroying the future of everybody that wants to make good things. If people see something they like, and they've got money, they don't first look at the price. They first look at the item. And if they know the guy that made it and the artist, and they know he does good work, the price is secondary. They want something for their home or for their office that they can show their friends, that their friends will see, something with impact. That's what they want, and they'll pay good money for it, believe me. So don't undercut yourselves if you're doing good work. Try and get a fair price for good work. I've also found that if I make something, I never do the finishing immediately. I set the piece aside for a week or two or a month. I put it on the table if I make a big bowl, and I walk past it and I look at it and I think about it. And if a friend comes to visit, or I ask them what do they think about it. I ask my wife, I ask the garden boy, what does he think about it? Eh? I ask all of them. And I listen to their criticism. I try and be as critical of my own work as I can. And then, if I feel unhappy about some aspect of that piece that I've created, then I take it back into my workshop or my studio and I try and change it. I do my best to change it. You know, a big bowl like this piece over here, you're seeing the end product, but you aren't seeing what I did before I got to this position. There were numbers of variations in color and texture, etc., etc. And I go through those and I change them until I feel totally confident that that piece is the way I want it to be. And I think probably all of us need to do more of that with the work that we are creating. Basically, what we end up doing then is we're producing work that is personal, that carries our personal signature. Okay, something that you have to be proud of because you know you did your best to create it. I always say to people that I don't want to be known as a wood turner. I would prefer to be known as a lathe artist or a wood artist. That's not because there's something wrong with being a wood turner. The only difference is that most people can be wood turners, but not everybody can be an artist. You have to take it a little bit further to create pieces of art that catch people's eye. Okay? And that's what I'm striving for, is to be a better lathe artist. And so I'm continuously experimenting. I very seldom do the same thing twice. But what I'm doing in the process of experimentation and trying new and different techniques is I'm building up a repertoire of techniques in my mind. So when I'm busy with a project, I don't have to run around to books or to other people. I've got ideas in my mind. I've tried some of them out, and I know that they can fit in and make some project something special. So that's where the experimentation comes into the picture. And you have to be very careful if you are selling goods on the mass market. It's very easy for your work to become mediocre. You're comfortable just churning out these things. If you want to go beyond that, then you have to try something new each time. If you make a table, try a different edging, or do some hand carving on it, or do some inlay into the veneer, or whatever. And that's how you're going to learn techniques, and you're going to be making things that are beyond just an ordinary dining room table. And again, please, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong. I started my talk by saying that we all have certain abilities, and you can't expect some people to go beyond their abilities. They like to do certain things, and it's their right to do those things, and they do wonderful things. But if you want to take it a bit further, then you need to spend more time on researching and on experimentation. If you are doing good work, and I'm sure there are people here that are, and I'm sure you will agree with me, once you start doing good work, you find that people come to you, and they will start commissioning you to make things for them. Now that's quite an exciting phase in one's life, because now you don't even have to worry whether you're going to sell the thing or not. You only got to worry how much is this guy going to pay you, but you know he's going to pay you good money because he's given you an open checkbook, basically. So, you know, the better your work becomes, the more professional it becomes, the more artistic it becomes, the more the upper end of the market is going to come to you and say, make something special for me. I want something different. I don't want the same table as my matey down the road's got. I want something different. And that's where I'm sure there are many people in this audience that are capable of doing that. And, you know, it's something we should promote. I mean, there are special individuals in every club. And we should nurture them. You know, don't break the guy down that's trying something and it doesn't succeed every time. Rather, encourage him to keep on trying new things. He's likely to come up with something new. I come from a scientific background. The other people here are also from a scientific background. You start by trying new things. And as you try more and more things, you start finding a direction. I was lucky, maybe in some respects, when I started making my little inlay pieces. These little pieces, I had a big bowl, and I turned the rim on the bowl, and it had ugly holes in it, and it was spalted, fungal discoloration of the wood, and it didn't look nice. So I thought, well, what am I going to do with this bowl? It's just not good enough. You know, I have to replace these ugly parts with something else. So I started doing cutouts. I started doing cutouts to get rid of the ugly stuff. When I did the cutouts, I noticed that, well, I'm on the right track, but I have to put something back again. So then I started putting inlay into the cutouts. Now I'm the only person in the world that's doing cutout and inlay work. So you may say I was lucky, but it started with experimentation. And now I do this kind of work, and it's very popular amongst the wood collectors in America. I don't sell much of it in South Africa. They are pieces that take a lot of time, anything between 20 and 100 hours on some of the more complex pieces. But it's hugely challenging. And I was looking for something, so when I'm as old as some of the guys in the audience here, and I can't make a big bowl anymore, well, maybe I can make some smaller ones. You know, it's physically it's much easier. Okay, so, you know, very briefly, that's what I wanted to say. But if I could just summarize by saying that I would never dream of telling anybody here what they should and shouldn't do. We should all do what we feel comfortable doing. But if you want to get ahead, then I think it's important that you take into account the issues that I've mentioned, but in particular, what your own interests and desires are, your own set of life and other skills, the resources of timber, equipment, and time that you have at your disposal, your personal contacts, both in terms of acquiring your timber and obviously for selling them. All these things are important. And then lastly, your mental and physical skills, and in particular your artistic flair. It's not always possible to become an artist. Some people find it easier than others, but it's something that you can certainly work on. You mustn't say, because I can't do artistic stuff now, that I will never be able to do it. That's nonsense. Get yourself some books. Get hold of books and read about things. Look at things. Watch things on TV. Look at nature. It's full of wonderful, wonderful ideas that you can employ in your work. And I'd just like to end off this aspect of my talk by saying that, you know, it's really the journey that counts and not the end product. If we can enjoy the journey, that's the main thing. So if we can all continue to enjoy our woodworking or our wood turning hobby, and maybe in a few years' time, I'll come and visit your club, and instead of there being 5 or 10 guys, there may be 20 or 30 wood turners. Thank you very much. We're going to take a break now, or not allowed to cut black wood either. Some of these timbers are quite old, they're 5, 10 years old. I've collected over the years, and I'm not going to use them. So if anybody's interested, I've got a couple of boxes in the back of my car. You're welcome to come and have a look at it.
Yeah, get off. Because I don't know what our distance from the board is like. Thanks very much. Okay, I'll drag that back a bit. And then go to board. We'll put another little board on there. Try and get a bigger picture. If you like. Well, I can take it. Yeah, we need to see it. Box. They're going to hold it first. Then it's over. Ja, maar uitlang is te klein. Ja, probeer het.
You feel inadequate. Huh?
Absolutely.
As long as you don't please. Okay.
I don't know how this will come out.
I'm going to run through these slides quite quickly. And really what they are, as I said, was a bit of background about myself and my interest in wildlife, plants and animals. And just by way of introduction, as you heard earlier, I spent about 10 years in Kruger in wildlife research. And these are some pictures that were taken when we were marking lions there. At one stage, there was a fear for the wildebeest and zebra populations. They were declining quite dramatically, and we got involved in a lion census, which required animals to be marked. I started my career as working on the zebra, and also studying the patterns of movement and migration. And then, as you heard from Bill, I moved down to Natal, and I spent about 5 years as Chief Research Officer with the Parks Board, and this was one of the projects on the Tongaland coast, studying the leatherback turtles. And then to get back to what we're really here about this evening, and that's about wood. I wonder if anybody I can tell me what that tree is. The big one, yeah.
Drie Macy
It was photographed in Botswana in the Okavango in 1966, I think it was. I was a bit younger then. But that's a big Mopani tree. For those of you who know Mopanis, I don't know if you've seen one that size. Imagine the planks. One plank and you've got your table, eh? Okay, that's just a baobab, but I've always been fascinated by trees and by timber, and so I can't help taking pictures of them. When I left the Parks Board, the Natal Parks Board, I joined the Anglo-American Corporation and as the group ecologist, and I looked after a number of properties and nature reserves, and I also got involved with environmental management, in particular on new mines, and this is an ancient mine shaft in Sadiola in Mali, in West Africa. I also got involved with some work in Namibia, in the desert. We prepared environmental impact control guidelines for prospecting that was taking place in the park. And that is the Welwitschia plant, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. It's an ancient plant and a very old specimen. They get up to about 2,000 years old. I also had the privilege some years ago to spend some time in North America, and that's a giant redwood, sequoia, that had fallen over. It must have been quite a strong wind to blow it over. But what I find interesting, and I'm the second from the right-hand side of the picture. If you look above my head there, you'll see a big bump on the tree, and that's a burl. I don't know if you know what a burl is. They call them burrs in some countries, but it's a growth that you get on a tree, which they use for veneering. You know, they do car dashboards from various veneers, walnuts and things like that. But it's basically the most valuable timber in the world. And I only spotted the burl when I was looking at my slides a while ago. While I was in Natal, I made a bit of furniture, and we made it out of stinkwood. Now, stinkwood is also a tree that you're not allowed to cut anymore, but these trees have been ring barked for their bark, which is a muti. And obviously, once these trees have been ring barked, they die, they coppice at the base. So this particular farmer got a permit to cut stinkwood trees. You can see they're quite young, they don't have a lot of dark hardwood yet, but there were some really nice trees amongst them, and I got quite a bit of timber, and it kept me going for a few years. I also spent a fair amount of time on the west coast of South Africa, on the Macquarie coast, the heavy mineral sands project with Anglo, and I was lucky enough one year to go up there in September, I think it was, when the flowers were out. And I'm showing you these pictures because these, although they come back, they remind me about things in my past. You know, I make things and I sometimes wonder where I get the ideas from. Well, the ideas that I had in my mind, as I said to you in my talk, came from my background and my experiences. Things that I saw. Now, I've seen many beautiful things in my life. Flowers and trees and plants and beautiful women. This was a young lady that was Miss World when I was in the Kruger Park about 25, 30 years ago, no, more than 30 years ago. And she came down there for a photo shoot. And one of the guys, I said to the guys, the rifle she's clutching there is a .375. And he said to me, well, he wonders what the caliber of the lady is. But she was a lovely lady in any case. Okay, what impresses us in life? You know, we're all impressed by certain things. We're impressed by beauty, be that flowers or buildings or people. And we're impressed by large things, large birds, and even small birds. You know, the scale of differences between things impress people. If I make a big bowl, it's impressive to people. If I make a small bowl, sometimes it's impressive as well. So there's a big bowl that I made out of a eucalyptus bowl. It is just 1 meter in diameter. And back to the Velvetia plant. Those are the flowers, the cones, the female cones of the plant. And I made a bowl out of a oak burl that I felt was inspired by things that I'd seen in the desert. And I called it desert flower. I also spent some time in the Kalahari, Gemsbok Park, and you see the wonderful sand dunes there. And I made a multiple axis bowl, and I called it dune landscape. What other things do we see in nature around us? We see things like this. Nature can be quite beautiful. I mean, mostly you just walk over that and you wouldn't notice it. But if you look a bit closer, what wonderful patterns and things, and how can you possibly employ some of these things in the work that you're doing? Well, there was a red ivory hollow form that had cracked substantially, and instead of hiding the cracks with some red resin or whatever, I decided to emphasize them. This is this thing is not focusing. There we go. Okay, this is a fairly large burl, resin tree burl. It's an indigenous tree in South Africa that's used for nothing. It's not used for firewood. And quite often they die and they have these wonderful burls, and those are all the marks that you can see underneath. And the termites get into them, and they do some wonderful sculptural work on the inside of the tree. And sometimes you can use nature to benefit the work you're doing by just turning a bowl out of a piece of wood that the termites and the weather would have destroyed in time. This is a picture taken down along the Vaal River, where I cut some burls from a eucalyptus tree. So this is an exotic tree. I don't care how much I hurt it, and I hope it dies, but it's still got some nice burls on it. And I didn't bring one of the bowls that I turned out of the biggest piece in the middle, but it's also, if it burls, it can be quite interesting. There, one of my multiple center bowls, multiple axis bowls on the lathe, and in my hand you will see a number of faceplates, steel faceplates, that I've used to counterbalance the off-center turning. Because you're moving that steel frame around on that board, and it started off weighing just over 100 kilograms. And if you don't counterbalance it, obviously it will rip itself off the frame. So I just used some of my face plates. And there I'm turning the piece, and it's turning quite slowly. You know, it's probably just over 300 RPM. Obviously, if you're doing very heavy work and off-center work like this, you have to turn at a slow speed. And there it's just been faced off. And then the underside is carved by hand. So this particular bowl here is not that one. This is just 3 bowls, but it was done in a similar fashion. And you can't turn the underside. The underside has to be carved by hand. So if someone says to me, why do I charge so much money for this big bowl? I'll tell him, it took me about a month to make it. Okay? And there's my granddaughter sitting in the bowl before it was finished. I had to show it to you because I'm proud of her, eh? Aren't we all? And there's the finished piece. And that piece I sold earlier this year for 35,000 Rand. And that is the wholesale price. I sold it to a friend of mine. It was going to America for $12,000, of which I would have got less than half. So I sold it to a local guy. That's a picture of the underside being carved and textured. Okay, there's just a picture of me in my workshop with a nice bowl that's going to be hollowed now on the inside. Just a picture of my turning tools. For those of you that aren't wood turners, it's really quite an easy thing to be a wood turner, but depending on what you do, you often have to make your own tools to suit the kind of work that you do. I have some long tools, as you can see on the right hand side. Those are heavy tools for working. They've got tungsten cutters on them. They're for working dry timber like leadwood in big bowls, where you don't want to stand right next to the bowl, you want to stand a bit further away for safety and so on. So those are the kinds of tools you make. This is just a picture showing me finishing the foot of a bowl. It's what we call a jam chuck, but I've tied onto the board with some string, and then I can do a nice job of the foot, so that you won't see that there was anything that attached this bowl to the lathe. I won't worry about that one now, but these are just some of the earlier inlaid pieces that I did. These are big pieces. These are about 600 millimeters in diameter. And then again back to some of the things that have influenced me in my life. This is again a greenback turtle on the Tongaland coast. And there's a little bowl that I made for an exhibition in America with a marine theme. The theme for the exhibition was marine theme. So I chose to do a series of marine animals and so on. Again, when I look back at some of the things that I have pictures of, that's a big elephant tusk, that's Kakuza. And then I did an inlay bowl out of African blackwood and sneezewood. And then I did the inlay with palmafum. And I called it Nocturnal Surround, but basically I was looking symbolically at elephants. I've always been interested in wildlife, and for 20 years I ran the game bird shoots for Anglo-American. And this is just a picture of my dog retrieving a francolin. I hope none of you are opposed to blood sports, but I enjoy hunting and fishing. And I eat cows and I eat sheep as well. I even eat eggs. But then I had an exhibition last year, and I did a theme piece for the organization. It was an organization that I helped to raise money for, called Agri, and they promote the sustainable use of wildfowl, of birds, and I did this little bowl for the exhibition. And it's basically red ivory, African blackwood, with kiat pearl inlay, animals and birds, and hunting scenes and so on. As I said, I've always been influenced by flowers. There's a little inlay bowl I call the Macwa Daisy that went to America a few years ago. Some more flowers. Another little bowl called Golden Dandelion. And that's similar to the one here, except this one hasn't got the red ivory inlay. I've left it out because it's a very unusual piece of wood. That's one piece of wood, but turning through the sapwood into the hardwood. Now we as wood turners are quite lucky because we can, the cabinet makers don't like using sapwood, hey? We can use the sapwood, we can use the hardwood, we can use the front wood, we can use the spalted wood, and we can even use the bark. We make many barks, which we call natural edge bowls. This piece of poplar that I picked up on the side of the road here in Edenvale, the outside is the natural bark of the poplar. So we're lucky, we can probably use more parts of the tree, but then we're very wasteful, because we turn probably 90 or 95% of it away. But then we do use wood that a lot of other people wouldn't use. There's another little piece that I did. And then we're getting towards the end now. For those of you that are starting to fall asleep, I've always been very interested in birds. I started my wildlife career being interested in birds. And I made this bowl, which is the one on the table here, where the inlay is a series of South African birds.